Hey everyone, this is part 3 of our Building with Claude API series. And in this video, we'll see how we can dial the creativity of Claude. We can do this by means of using a parameter called temperature. We had already discussed in a previous video how Claude and essentially all LLMs predict the next word from your input. So when you give what do you think as an input to a LLM, as a first step, it tokenizes the inputs, and then from the tokens, it creates the embeddings, and from the embeddings, we know that it creates this contextualization, and then it generates the output tokens, right? Now, the output token, again, is just going to be one at a time. So for this given input, or what do you think, it's just going to predict the next word that comes after this based on probability, right? So here in this diagram, we can see when we gave the input of what do you think, the probable next words would be about, which has about 30% chance. Then you also had what do you think would, what do you think of, what do you think is, what do you think when, and what do you think makes, and what do you think we, right? So these are all different probable next words in this sequence. And it looks like, at least for this LLM, about seems to have the highest probability, right? We can even see this represented in this graph where we can see the different words shown in this 2D graph. Like you can see about has 30% and would has 20% and so on, right? Now, the way the LLM chooses this next word, right? The way it selects the next word can be adjusted by means of using this parameter called temperature, right? And this temperature is nothing but a decimal value from 0.0 to 1.0. And using this temperature, we can control how deterministic we want the selection of this next word to be, or how random or creative we want the selection of the next word to be. When you set a low temperature in the range of 0.0 to 0.3, for example, the word that has the highest probability would be usually selected. But when you set a higher temperature in the range of 0.7 to 1.0, other words also have a chance of getting selected. So that's how LLMs become more creative, essentially by means of selecting different probable words in the sequence that it generates. So basically, when you want your LLMs to generate less creative outputs for things like factual responses, coding assistance, data extraction, and content moderation, you would probably want to use a lower temperature value, right? And for more creative work, things like brainstorming, creative writing, marketing content, joke generation, you would use a higher temperature. And anything in the middle, like things like summarization, educational content, problem solving, creative writing with constraints, you would use a medium temperature. So for less creative generations, low temperatures, and more creative generations, higher temperature. Okay, so let's see this in action. Over here, we have the same chat helper method that we saw in the previous video. I've just removed the system prompt because it is not really relevant for this demonstration. Instead, I have added the temperature parameter over here. Okay, and let's set the temperature to be 0.0. Okay, that means it's going to give us a more factual, deterministic, predictable outcome every time we ask it to do something. All right, and the prompt that we are going to give is generate a one sentence movie idea. All right, so let's see what movie idea it generates when you give a temperature of 0.0. Okay, so let's run this. And it gives us this idea of a cynical time traveling insurance adjuster preventing something. All right, so let's try to generate another idea. Okay, so let me run this again. And you can see that it is basically giving us the same idea all over again. It's saying a cynical time traveling insurance adjuster must prevent some catastrophic accidents, right? So that same idea is coming up again. So if you run it even a third time, because the temperature is 0.0, it is not being creative. It's just like generating the most probable next words, and it seems to be the same idea all the time. So if you run this the third time, here again, it is generating the exact same idea of a cynical time traveling insurance adjuster preventing some catastrophic accidents, all right? But for this use case of generating a one-sentence movie idea, we want our LLM to be creative, right? So let's set the temperature to be 1.0, which will make the LLM to choose other words, not just the most probable word, and make the output sound more creative. So with the temperature value of 1.0, now let's try to generate an outcome. And we can see that we have a new idea now. A cynical food critic discovers that the mysterious new restaurant in town. Okay, so it's some sort of a new idea. Let's run this again. And we get a different idea now. A cynical retirement home activities coordinator discovers something. And let's run it the third time. And we get yet another idea. A retired time travel agent must prevent her younger self from making some mistakes. So this is pretty cool, right? The temperature parameter helps us to dial the creativity of our LLMs. Follow along if you're exploring AI for your workflows.